All right now, sorry, didn't realize I was live. I thought it was still processing. So let me get my lighting on par. There we go. And let me desmudge the lens. All right. And get myself comfy. Don't have any water, so I don't plan on doing this for too long. That's what she said. um, yeah, I can already feel my voice it, escaping me. So, um, I think this is going to be a short live. I just wanted to talk about the TV show Andor. And the surprise that it is amazingly good. It's an amazingly good show. Um, I did not realize it was going to be that good, but apparently Tony Gilroy is an awesome showrunner. Uh, so the funny thing is that I had started watching the final season of Andor earlier this year, and I thought it was boring, but that was because I was doing secondary watching, which meant I was like glued to my phone at the same time that I was watching the show. And that's a disservice to watching the show because are more just you're more or less just listening to it in the background as opposed to like attentively watching or even listening to the dialogue. So that's what happened, and I just wrote it off. I'm like, oh, this is boring. I don't want to watch the show. And I got through the first three episodes, but didn't really pay attention because once I did actually watch it, I was like, there's a lot of intrigue going on here. So, so now I haven't finished it yet. I have like two episodes left, and I've already binged like three episodes this evening when I should have been doing something more productive. So, and each episode is roughly about 45 minutes or so. So, hello everyone in the chat. Um, so, this is the final season of Andor that I'm watching. I'm on episode 11. So, it's two episodes left, episode 11, episode 12. Very shocked that it was so good. Episode 8 is a shocker. Like, it shows the Gorman Massacre. The Gorman Massacre was something that was mentioned back in the animated series, The Clone Wars, but it was mentioned in passing. Like there wasn't a lot of detail about it. This goes into it in detail. It shows the build up to the Gorman Massacre, the Gorman Massacre itself, and then the aftermath of all that of this genocide. So um on top of that, the showrunner Tony Gilroy has basically modeled the Gorman massacre events onto um he 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 modeled it on the events, the true life events of the French resistance back in the 18th century. So if you haven't heard of that, you could Google that if you're interested. But he took the real life historical events happening um, with the French resistance in the 18th century and modeled this Star Wars event on that, which is very creative. Um, Moreover, it was it was genuinely sad, like seeing that happen. Like even like the characters really sold like it really felt like that happened. Like this was like an historical event that just taking place before people's eyes, just on a sci-fi level. What's up, Carlton? Um, Also, what did I want to say about that? Like I said, it basically shows a genocide, and these aren't aliens; these are humans. And to kind of make it salient that it's supposed to be like the French Resistance, the actors are all speaking in a French accent. Like they're not speaking French in the show because they actually made up a fictional language for the show, for the for the Gorman people, but it's modeled on a francophone syntax. And well, well, francophone syntax. Well, no. I'll say it's modeled on a francophone, um, a French phonology, to put in better words, meaning it sounds like French, although it's a fictional language, and it it's crazy. Like this is not a little kid Star Wars. Yeah, a dialect, not really a dialect. It's a completely separate language because a dialect is just a variant of a language. So like for English speakers, like if you speak with a Piedmont, Virginia dialect, or you speak with a New York City accent, or you speak, with a upper Midwestern twang type accent. What people call accents are dialects, right? So, um, whereas say like in this show, the language they're speaking is called the Gore language of the Gorman people, but it is modeled on a on a French phonology. Phonology means like the study of sounds and stuff like that. So it's made to sound like it's speaking a French like language, but it's a made up language for the show. So you know, they probably hired some sort of linguist to craft the language for the show. Meaning they meaning they put a lot of quality in this show that they will create a fictional language just for the show, but have an analog with the real life French resistance. Um, and it said it shows how much went into the rebellion against the Galactic Empire beyond just your typical Star Wars stuff. Like where it's almost like Disney's not even worthy of such a good show, of such a good Star Wars show, because mostly everything that Disney does dealing with Star Wars or even Lucasfilm in general is trash. So it almost seems like Disney isn't even sorry, not even worthy of how good this series is. That's how high of a praise I will give it. On top of that, I think it's nominated for 15 different Emmys right now. 15 Emmys. So that like I think like best series, actor, blah 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 blah. Like it 15 excuse me, 15 Emmys is huge accolades. Well, I mean nominations, but yeah. I would arguably say it's probably one of the best shows that came out this year. because like I said, it's nominated for 15 Emmys. So for people like, man, I want to see some sci-fi show, you can. Here's the thing: you can like this show without even liking Star Wars. But if you are a dyed-in-the-wool Star Wars fan like myself, you'll also like it because it ties into events that happen within the Star Wars mythos. Like obviously Andor is a spinoff of the movie Rogue One, so this is all the precursor to what happens in Rogue One. Also, this sets up the events for how we get a Death Star, and it shows how morally depraved the Empire was. I mean, that is like this is not your typical Star Wars for 12-year-old boys. Like this is for the grown folks. This was clearly for the grown folks. Like these stormtroopers don't miss their shots. Okay, like it's not gonna be like some goofy Disney Plus Star Wars show where people are just shooting blasters at each other and no one's getting hit. They get hit in this series. They get hit in this series, and sometimes fatally so. It's not just some pew 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 pew, and nothing happens. Things happen here. So, and it's like the reason why I said you can like it outside of a sci-fi fantasy genre is that um, it's also a sort of like it's also a spy thriller. It's like a spy thriller dropped into the Star Wars universe. And like I said, people will be familiar with Cassian Andor from Rogue One. I mean, he sacrificed himself in Rogue One, but it explains why he was the way that he was in the movie, like why he was so cutthroat, and it also makes ties up everything nicely of why a lot of the characters we see in the show aren't seen in Rogue One. I mean, obviously the biggest reason is that they all died, but this shows what happened to all these characters in the show by the last couple of episodes. Like I said, episode 8 is probably the apex. Like this, like after episode 8 there's still 4 more episodes afterwards, but episode 8 it just comes to a crescendo, like a dramatic crescendo in what happens again with the Gorman massacre. Then it also shows how the people uh, that are part of the empire, all like is run by, like they're not just evil. It's like they're just a bunch of bureaucrats who are like trying to maneuver against each other to jockey for a higher position within the empire. And that sounds pretty realistic to like real life government. Like not that, most of the government isn't immoral, it's just amoral. Like it's without morals. It's not, you know, um an immoral institution. It's just amoral. And just like with, Andor, a lot of bureaucrats within the US government are just a bunch of people who are self-interested and looking to try to better their position within the government to make more money and to hold more power. So that's what you see happening in the show. Like, because it's easy just to write off everyone in the empire as just a bunch of space Nazis. And yeah, they are indeed space Nazis. Let's not mince words. They are definitely space Nazis. But just like in the real world, when you look at like the events of World War II and stuff like that, these people weren't just cartoonishly evil. What made them evil, if we're going to use that term, is that you know they were willing to compromise their integrity in order to jockey for power with other people of their akin to their own station in the government, or they're willing to backstab each other, um, that sometimes even within the same governmental agency or department, people will be trying to compete with each other for influence and presumably higher pay. So now this is in contrast to Star Trek, where in Star Trek they're more they're more evolved in maybe a way that may not be realistic. But Star Trek wasn't ever supposed to be realistic. It was supposed to give us a vision of how life could be in the future if we got past all our selfish um, all our selfish and petty ways, which are symbolized by the Ferengi in Star Trek Next Generation. The Ferengi were supposed to be um, a representation of 20th century people, 20th century humans, to show how petty and cruel and envious and jealous and all the worst traits of people, avaricious, like, but amongst the humans and other aliens, they were more noble. Like they, like their jobs weren't like they didn't work for a living, like to make money. They worked because they thought that was the thing to do to better society, and they competed with each other still, but in a sense of they compete with each other to do better, working for Starfleet or wherever you might find yourself in the Star Trek universe, which is nice, but it's not realistic. Like people are going to have selfish impulses. They're going to look. They're going to be looking for ways to make themselves in a better position up um, to the you know even if to do so it you have to hurt others. But in Star Wars is way more honest. Even when you look at the prequels. Now the prequels I don't like, but I'd be remiss to say that it wasn't sort of accurate about how flawed um, our government, our federal government can be, especially as it had a scathing critique of Congress. So if you watch the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith, but I say particularly with the first two, Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, you get more of an inside look at how uh, the galactic government works, both the Senate and the local governance. But getting back to Andor, like I said, Andor ties into all these things, like showing how the Gorman massacre was basically because they had already planned for years to to mine this planet, because it was one of the few planets that had an abundance of kyber crystals. And if people know their Star Wars, they know that kyber crystals are what powers lightsabers. But kyber crystals are also the power source for the Death Star. And so to get at that mineral, they were willing to commit genocide of the people on the planet in order to get that resource. And that is just so wild when you see it. Like it just sounds like something nerdy. You're like, yeah, whatever. That's you're just talking about some Star Wars stuff. But it's like, yeah, when you watch it, this doesn't look like sci-fi fantasy anymore. This looks like something that could actually happen, which is because it is modeled on something that actually happened, which was the 18th century French resistance, which led to their eventual freedom, although there was a lot of carnage leading up to the eventual French democracy. And Carlin says, "Yeah, it sounds very realistic." I know, right? I said, "Yep, it's part of the game." But yeah, that's all I want to say. I mean, we can go into more stuff beyond just what happened in Andor, but I wanted to start off with that because I just wanted to give my own mea culpa for the fact that I derided this show 6 months ago, thinking it was trash. And then I started looking at it. I was like, all right, let me actually watch the first episode, not be on my phone, just like actually attend to the show. And I did. I'm like, okay, this is actually pretty good. Like the first time I watched it 6 months ago, it was like, okay, this is boring because nothing was happening in the first two episodes. And that is true. Nothing, there's no action in the first two, 3 episodes. But what is happening is a lot of story building. There was a lot of story building in those first 3 episodes of the final season. And it was similar in the first season of Andor too, which was like three years ago, I believe, when it came out 3 or 4 years ago. When no, it was like 3 years ago when Andor came out 3 years ago. The first season, um, the first couple of episodes started off slowly, but it had to build because it was a whole new show. But it paid off because the last few episodes of the first season of Andor really paid off. You really start seeing the the increments of the rebellion being sparked, and there was some unfortunate death in the first season, but this one, the second season, the second and both second and final season, it got way worse. Like it was so bad that even one of the people who called for the mass execution of all these people, she herself broke down crying about it. Like it was just so much. And then it's like I said, they were playing, even though they were all everyone in Empire were doing like there to achieve the same goal, they were working against each other. Like one of the guys was dating the chick who called the shots to eventually have the genocide of the Gora people. And like I said, she broke down and cried, but she also was dating someone who had made his way up, to the upper middle tier of the galactic empire ranks or whatever. And she lied to him about what was going to happen. He didn't know that no matter what the people did, that they were going to still fire down on them. Melissa's haven't seen it, but people I trust said both endings for the seasons were worth it. But I've only heard about it twice now, 3 times. Haven't seen the trailer yet. Worth it or yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it. But so yeah, so she lied to the guy she was dating, who's also like in the upper rank but lower than her. Um, because they basically played it close to the chest that they were gonna basically massacre these people no matter what, so that they could get them out of the way, so they could start mining the planet for kyber crystals. And it was messed up, so they actually hired some gore, some Gorman assassins, and used them to kick off the whole genocide. So what happened? The people are protesting and they're peacefully protesting, and it was so wild because they were singing in a fictional, like, this is how much attention to detail that the showrunner Tony Gilroy did. Like I said, he made a fictional language just for the show, for the Gorman people, which has a French sounding um, phonology to it, and like the people were even singing in the Gore language, and it was just a we are the like I'm they're saying it in a fictional language, but I'm gonna just give like sort of how it sounded. It's like we are the Gore Valley Highland. Like it was I was like, this is the most touching thing I've ever seen in a sci-fi movie since The Wrath of Khan. Right? Since, like, I don't know, The Wrath of Khan, or Luke defeating his father. Like these, like that's how I I I'm not capping. That's how high I would rank that episode. It's up there with some of the highest points in science fiction, or sci-fi fantasy. The Luke defeating his father and then bring him to Endor, where he um mourned him over the bonfire. That's like one of the most touching moments in Star Wars to me. That moment, um, the moment in Star Trek Two: The Wrath of Khan, where uh, make sure I don't get caught up here. You can't see your boy with watery eyes, but the part in Star Trek Two: The Wrath of Khan where uh, Spock is dying of radiation poisoning, but he saved the entire Enterprise because he's a Vulcan. He was able to go into that radiation containment room and contain the radiation before it it destroyed the entire Enterprise. But in doing so, he had to make the ultimate sacrifice. But no human could have withstood that amount of radiation to save the ship. And as he's dying, he's telling Kirk, um, he's talking with Kirk, and Kirk was like, "Why would you do this? What?" He's like, "Because the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." Very utilitarian sentiment, by the way. But you know, Kirk just breaks down because he almost went into the containment room, and Scotty was like, "No, he's dead already." In this little Scottish accent, he's like, "No, he's dead already." And Spock is just sitting there. He gives him the Vulcan signal. He was like, "I will forever and always be your friend." That is one of the most touching points, not in just science fiction, but in movies, period, I would say. But definitely in sci-fi. But you will have to not have a soul to say, well, it's just science fiction. That was one of the most touching moments in a science fiction movie or sci-fi fantasy movie. Because Star Wars is sci-fi fantasy, which I'm not going to go into that difference unless people are curious. But the 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 gore massacre in episode 8 of season 2 of Andor is ranked up there with with that. That's how highly I'll rank it. It's up there with the top 5 scenes of science fiction or sci-fi fantasy ever. Is up there. Maybe I'm just saying that because of the recency effect. That could be it. Could be my recency bias. So, but it was still really good. Melissa, it sounds interesting. He said, I love finding new series. Thank you, Contrarian. He said, is it a fully fleshed out language? I love when they do it. True nerds understand. Yeah, this a fully fleshed out language. Like I said, it's a completely. It's just like Vulcan. I mean, sorry, it's just like Klingon. Like Klingon is an actual was made for Star Trek, but then a actual scientific linguist took the stuff from the Star Trek show and turned it into an actual language. I forgot what he modeled it on. I think he modeled it on Hebrew or something. I can't remember what he modeled the Vulcan language on in real life. But so um this isn't the first time you've seen the show do this. Like some of the best shows, best sci-fi or fantasy shows have done this. Lord of the Rings did this. For people who aren't hip to who aren't Tolkien geeks, J.R.R. Tolkien, who's the creator of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, um, he he because he was a philologist. A philologist is someone who studies like it's different. It's different from a linguist. A philologist is someone who studies like languages in the sense of like a historical context, not so much as like a in a scientific context where you're studying the. There is some overlap, but a linguist usually studies the organization of language. A philologist studies sort of like the history of languages, sort of like that. And so J.R.R. Tolkien professionally was a philologist, and he before he wrote Lord of the Rings, he had actually created the fictional Elven languages for the books. He created fictional Elven languages, and so they used those actual uh, languages, fictional languages he created for his books in the Lord of the Rings trilogy films. That's why if that's why the show feels so real because they're using like actual languages. Like the common tongue in Middle Earth is, obviously um, English for us, but the different languages they speak in Arda. Arda is the name for all of Earth in in Lord of the Rings. And on Middle Earth, the continent in which everything is happening, like all these languages he crafted, like the Elven languages. Um, so that's why Lord of the Rings is so damn good. That's next on my DVDs to buy. I've bought so many so far. I should be getting Bloodsport tomorrow or Wednesday. And you guys, if some of you seen my DVD collection so far, it's a small collection, but I only wanted to buy like the core stuff that I know I'm going to watch over and over again. Where some things are just movies I like, but I'm probably not going to watch them over and over again. And if I do, it'll be like when I catch them on a streaming platform. Carter says, "Yeah, I remember that scene. Yeah, he's referring to the stuff I was talking about earlier, guys, with Star Wars and Star Trek. He says, yeah, it kind of reminds me of The Walking Dead and Negan obliterated Rick's crew in front of him. Dang, that's memorable, but not in the same way. To me, that was more memorable for the gore, not so much for like it being well. I mean, seeing Glenn be brutally beaten to death uh, was a moment. Well, I'll say this: I don't think it has the same impact as the Gorman massacre. So for one, the scene where Glenn is brutally beaten uh, actually turned off so many people they stopped watching the show after that season. That's although that came straight out of the comic books, but with the show they would pick and choose what they put in the show and what they didn't. Like for like Rick didn't lose his hand in the show, but if you watch the spinoff of Rick and Michonne, then he finally loses his hand, which just didn't make sense. I'm like, if he didn't lose his hand throughout the entire canon series, why have him lose his hand in a spinoff show? Because in the comic book, he lost his hand to the governor, right? So it didn't make sense for him now to lose his hand after he's defeated the governor and Negan and these other folks. Like it was like needless. But besides that, I would say it also doesn't correlate to the Gorman massacre because the Gorman massacre is not just meant to be gory and brutal. It is brutal. It's not gory though because it's Star Wars, but it is brutal. But it's meant to show how the it's meant to show how real the stakes are here with the Empire because it's easy when you look at some of these more poorly made Disney plus Star Wars shows to not see just how brutal the Empire was. Like there's no here's another thing, and this is a reason why some people didn't like Andor, and originally a reason I didn't either. There's no Jedi, there's no Sith throughout the whole thing, right? Like you hear the Emperor being mentioned um, several times, but you never see him make an appearance. You never see any Jedi make an appearance. You never see Darth Vader make an appearance. There's so all of the fantasy part of it is left out. But and like I said, that was the initial reason why I wasn't interested in the series. But once you actually watch it, it still fits nicely. Excuse me. It still fits nicely within the Star Wars mythos. Well, it says Game of Thrones has Dothraki, Elder Scrolls has Dedrick, etc. Now fully recognized yet, but full on language like Lord of the Rings, which I find fast. Mm, the difference is that J.R.R. Martin was not a philologist. He didn't know languages. He's not that clever. I'm just gonna put it there. Put it there. J.R.R. Tolkien is a much better storyteller and smarter guy than J.R.R. Martin. Plus, it didn't take it didn't take Tolkien like 50 years to finish his books. Just gonna leave that there. But on top of that, the fictional languages that we hear in the Game of Thrones TV series was done by the producers, not by G.R.R. Martin. So I don't find it as clever. Um, obviously, like the Valyrian language is supposed to be like High Latin, like classic High Latin. Um, Dothraki is a mixture of languages, but they're not as clever because, like I said, they actually had to hire a linguist to do that for them. And I guess arguably you could say they did that for Star Wars as well. But the difference is, well, the difference is that um, the difference is that the Andor show wasn't previously a book. This was a direct. This is just this was just coming directly from a screenplay, whereas the Game of Thrones series was based off the Song of Ice and Fire, which is 5 books in which no there's no language play in them, like you'll see in J.R. Martin's books, The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, and the lost the unfinished tales. Not to mention the books that his son ended up doing based off of his father's works that he never finished. So he said Carlin says Lord of the Rings was fire. Yeah, that's what I'm about to order the DVDs, and it's only $9.99 for all three. I have the book too, but unfortunately my book is back in the Philippines. Like I said, I'm a Tolkien nerd. Like I said, not only did I read The Hobbit back in the 7th grade, and then I started to read Lord of the Rings, and then I never got past the Fellowship of the Rings. So I read them as adults, but I had watched the animated version of Lord of the Rings and the animated version of The Hobbit back as a kid. So then, as an adult, um, in my early 30s, I read Lord of the Rings, and then I was like, I want more. So then I read the Silmarillion, which is the precursor to Lord of the Rings. It talks about the both the first and second ages. And then I read the Unfinished Tales, which expands on some of the many of the events that happened within the Silmarillion. Uh, Moon says Glenn didn't die like that in the graphic novel, but I love Negan in the series, and Morgan and Carol have are my favorite character arcs. No, he did in the comic books he did get beat to death by Negan with his bat. What's his bat name? Charlene or whatever. I forgot the name he named his bat, but no, he did. It wasn't it wasn't the exact thing, but no, he did get beat to death. I remember because during the Walking Dead show, like remember when the Walking Dead came on afterwards, they would show the Talking Dead, and they showed the comic book panels side by side with Glenn's execution, and showed just how it matched up to the comic book panels from the books. Like that was they were I would say that was more loyal to the books than the events of the governor, for obvious reasons, because like I say, if you read the books, the governor was actually more brutal than Negan. Negan was brutal, but I would say there was a rationale behind his cruelty. Governor was just cruel just because completely completely psychopathic. He was just a complete psychopathic killer. Like the governor was way worse than Negan. What he did to Michonne, what he did to Rick, like he was off the chains. But but like I said, when you look at the panel of Glenn's death side by side to the TV show, it's almost one for one. Now, how they arrived at that point in the show differed than how they arrived to that point in the comic book. So I'll admit that much. But the brutal execution, like that was pretty pretty accurate to the books. No, he says Andor based on the book. No, it's this is just an entire screenplay that is meant to be a spinoff of Rogue One. So you have to watch Rogue One to know who Cassian Andor is. Melissa Tolkien is way better though, no question. Yeah, definitely. He was much more accomplished as a like I said. My biggest gripe with G.R. Martin is he's a lazy writer, and he's like opportunistic. Like he finished writing his fifth book when the series first came out back in 2011. 2011. Okay. So by the time we get to 2017 with the ending of the sixth season, he could have had the Winds of Winter finished. And the only reason he didn't, it wasn't because it was difficult for him to write that final book, because he had been writing chapters and releasing them on his blog um, for years. What happened? He started doing a whole bunch of other stuff. He wrote a whole anthology of Westeros. He started writing the prequels, um, a bunch of prequel books. Um, then he started doing some stuff not even related to A Song of Ice and Fire, like sci-fi, and producing other TV shows like Dark Winds on AMC. So it's like, yeah, I guess you wouldn't finish the last two books, Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, when you're working on like literally like 10 other things in the interim, other than just finishing those last two books. And now I don't think he ever plans on doing so, because I think he finds it intimidating to live up to how good the first five books are, and also give a good ending to the books with the show already telling the end of the story. So, and he's not in the best of health. He's a 70-year. He's a morbidly obese man in his late 70s or early 80s. I can't remember. So, and he's even intimated that he doesn't want his estate to finish the books when he dies. Like, he's not gonna allow, like, an author to come like a maybe one of his sons or whoever, to come in and then finish the story for him after he passes away. So it was like he's a schmuck. So I I owe a friend who I betted 6 years ago that he would still write those books. I'm gonna tell him, nah, man, I need to I need to pay up, because I don't believe he's gonna finish those books, because this was 6 years ago when we made that bet. 6 years ago, maybe seven, but yeah. Oh, he says it's way better than over Game of Thrones. Yeah, definitely. Now, Game of Thrones. Now, I'm going to be fair. Game of Thrones does have some pluses over the Tolkien books. For one, in the Tolkien books, you never really see how a medieval economy works. Also, you always see the heroes rise to the occasion. In Game of Thrones, it's kind of cynical, where you often see the heroes do the wrong thing and then they suffer for it. Like, often it is the case that even when people make accidents in some other high fantasy novels, because the genre in which um, Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and the Chronicles of Narnia all fall under, is called high fantasy. The difference between high fantasy and low fantasy is just that in high fantasy, it takes place in an alternate world, where in low fantasy, it's supposed to take place in our world. Okay. So that's the difference between high fantasy and low fantasy. And often high fantasy can either be like medieval fantasy, right? Um, like Lord of the Rings and so forth. But you also have sci fi fantasy, like Star Wars. But anyway, and I would argue that Star Wars happens in a high fantasy because it's taking place in another world. It's not taking place in our world, right? So I would say it's it's sort of like it is a mesh between science fiction and high fantasy, is where you would put Star Wars, because you don't give like strong scientific explanations of the phenomena that happens in Star Wars, like the Force and stuff like that. That's why so many people were pissed off with the prequels, when George Lucas attempted to give like an explanation of how the Force works, that it works through midi chlorians, which basically midi-chlorians was like a word to describe like the real life components of our human cells. But in any case, um, the Game of Thrones was a little bit more realistic in its depiction of how brutal the Middle Ages were. Even if this did take place in a in a fictionalized world, it was very realistic to how you know how brutal um, the medieval world was, and you don't really get that from the Chronicles of Narnia and from Lord of the Rings. From Lord of the Rings, there, I mean, it seems a bit brutal insofar as how they deal with these fictional bad guys, but not so much just how brutal everyday life is in itself, living in that sort of era. Game of Thrones depicts that very well, very well. Lucille, right? That's what the name of his bat, Lucille. It's been such a while. Then she's a vampire bat. Then he just had some of the best lines. He's like, "You see what I did there, Rick? You see what just happened there, Rick? I put my dick in your mouth and I made you thank me for it, Rick." I was like, damn, this guy's brutal. He ended up befriending the very woman whose husband he brutally beat to death, which is even funnier that they play the parents of Bruce Wayne in Batman versus Superman. If people missed that, that was Negan and what's her name? He's I mistype. Sorry, didn't mean to say Glenn. I meant Carl. Oh yeah. Well, Carl didn't die in the comics. Um, so I mean, he's the last man standing, and that was originally the creator's intent. I forgot the name of the main co-creator of Walking Dead, but he always meant for Carl to be the last man standing, which he is in the comics. Although I think the way Rick dies in the comics is pretty dumb. And in contrast, in the show, Rick is pretty much the last man standing. Well, he and Michonne, but then there's the other spinoffs with Daryl and Carol. So I don't know what happens to them. I don't really care because I don't think they needed their own spinoff, to be honest. And it was just too many Walking Dead spinoffs, and they were all like, yeah. The only spinoff that I really watched, I felt I had to watch was Rick and Michonne because it seemed like that was the end of the story was Rick and Michonne. But to keep going with the other spinoffs with Carol and Daryl is like, why? They should just ended it with the Rick and Michonne spinoff. Um, but on top of that, Negan didn't unalive Carl in the series either. Like he was act if you remember in the show, Negan was actually sad that Carl died. He he obviously had had some has some feelings for Carl, even if he hated Rick. Carl says Gollum was my favorite character from Lord of the Rings. Precious. Who was my favorite character? Uh, I want to say Bilbo, but Bilbo was even though Bilbo was the protagonist of The Hobbit, he was just a minor character in Lord of the Rings. Um, which but that's cool. He could still be my favorite character even if he was a minor um character. Because it would be too easy to just say Frodo and Well, no, no. So if yeah, if we're talking about the whole token out of all of the token stuff, then hmm, yeah, if we're talking about all of the token stuff, not just Lord of the Rings, I'm going to say Bilbo. But if we're talking specifically about Lord of the Rings and not the other stuff, The Hobbit, the Silmarillion, the Lost Tales, and the other stuff that came out afterwards with his J.R.R. Tolkien's son Christopher Tolkien, who made the who also did the Unfinished Tales and Baron and Luthien, not to mention J.R.R. Tolkien's first writing, which wasn't a book, but it was actually a short story. It was the story of Tom Bombadil, uh, who wasn't mentioned in Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. He is mentioned in the Rings of Power, but I refuse to watch that. I watched the very first episode of that 4 years ago, and it was trash and it was boring. So I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna watch the rest of the rest of the Rings of Power, which they made an entire series based off of two lines in the appendix of Lord of the Rings, because the Tolkien estate didn't give Amazon the rights to use the Silmarillion, which is a treasure trove of a treasure trove of stuff that could be made into content. But they didn't give Amazon the rights to the Silmarillion, so instead they just picked through some stuff in the appendix of Lord of the Rings and made the Rings of Power and completely bastardized the Tolkien the Tolkien mythos. But in any way, um, I don't know if I want to say Sam or Frodo. Uh, because when you if you real because even according to Tolkien himself, if you read Lord of the Rings, the real hero of Lord of the Rings is Samwise Gamgee. He sort of like he was sort of like um Tolkien wrote him to be sort of like the manservant of a military officer, as you know Tolkien himself served in I believe World War I, I think, and that's why Lord of the Rings is sort of a very warlike writing, as was the Chronicles of Narnia, but which is depicted to be happening in the real life events of World War II. But then they go to the fictional world of Narnia to escape. It, you get it. But anyway, um, like I said, Samwise Gamgee is, according to Tolkien himself, is the true hero of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But that doesn't mean because he's the actual hero that I have to pick him as my favorite. He is one of my favorites to be sure, though. Um, I'm just gonna go with Frodo. I'm sorry. I know that's basic. I know that's kind of basic, but yeah, I'm gonna go with Frodo for just Lord of the Rings. But like I said, if we're talking about all the Tolkien stuff, it's Bilbo. These these Bagginses. But yeah, Frodo is my favorite character from Lord of the Rings, but Bilbo is my overall favorite character from the Tolkien, the Tolkien universe. Probably just because The Hobbit was the first book I read. We had to read it from my seventh grade class, but I loved it. Then we watched the, then we got to watch the animated film by the animators back in the day, Rankin Bass. They used to make they used to make a lot of great animated stuff. Rankin Bass in like the 70s and 60s and stuff like that. Like for people not familiar with Rankin Bass, like they were behind the classic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer animation, Frosty the Snowman, the Santa Claus, all those like classic Christmas type cartoons from a long time ago using the stop motion anime excuse me, the stop motion animation that came from the Rankin Bass um, films. They also, for us, if you're a Gen Xer, you might remember this movie called The Last Unicorn. That was a Rankin Bass film. That was probably one of the first things I ever saw in the movies, which is hard to say because this that happened in '82 and I was like 4 years old. So the first things I remember seeing in the movies were at 4 years old. Yes, I remember that. I can remember back to four. So The Last Unicorn, uh, E.T., The Dark Crystal, which was by Jim Henson, where E.T. was still Steven Spielberg. Like I remember films that long ago as a 4 year old, and I remember that Rankin Bass film, The Last Unicorn. Because I grew up on those cartoons, right? And I remember, I think we watched the Lord of the Rings stuff probably in elementary school, even though I watched The Hobbit in like the seventh grade. I can't remember exactly. Because The Lord of the Rings didn't have the same quality as The Hobbit. If people, some people might not remember, because I think part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy wasn't made by Rankin Bass, or something happened where the production was completely different. So it changed from the Fellowship of the Rings, um, with the Two Towers and the Return of the King. Like there was a like the animation was completely different, and I think the voice actors changed. But like the first part of it with Fellowship of the Ring was very much like the other Rankin Bass films, like The Hobbit. Then like I think in the Two Towers and Return of the King, either Rankin Bass didn't produce it or they changed something that made it completely different. I forgot, but I know on the YouTube channel Secret Galaxy, they touch upon the what happened with the history of the animation of the Lord of the Rings stuff. Carlin says, yeah, the first film I remember was Night of the Living Dead by George Romero. Oh yeah, I wasn't born when that came out. I mean, I watched it, as a when it was like on cable TV. But yeah, I never I was too young for that to see that when it was first released, and it was spooky. At least the black guy survived to the end, but that was kind of messed up how he just got shot at the end after making it all the way through the zombie, the whole zombie thing. Then I'm trying to remember if I ever saw Return of the Living Dead, which came out in 1985. By the way, I just saw the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time 2 days ago. Just watched that. The It was so anticlimactic the way. I mean, because it was an early slasher film. It happened in what came out 1973, 1974. Like the way people were just getting the teenagers got brutally snuffed out, but there was like no tension to it. It was both bad and good. It was bad because without that tension, like usually created through some sort of musical high pitch or something like that, it misses some of that tension to keep you glued to the to the to the screen to know, okay, something eerie is about to happen. However, it was good because it just showed how brutal and just how off-putting what was happening to them was, because it was like there was no segue to seeing what's happening to these kids. It was just like, turn your head and you'll miss it. But I'm not going to go see the. I'm not going to watch the sequels to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The first one was good enough. Um, but I guess Leatherface was the first of the slashers. It wasn't the first slasher film, actually, but I think he was like the first of the big slasher monster type guys. Like, he predated Michael Myers and predated Freddy Krueger, who predated Jason. I mean, Jason was, because Jason wasn't even in the first Friday the 13th, obviously, because everyone remembers that trivia from Scream, right? Then Ghostface came along. I think he was the last. No, Terrifier is the last of the slashers of right now. But after Jason, I guess you had Chucky. I guess he qualifies as a slasher. um, and am I missing anyone? I think that's all of them. Like, well, Pinhead. I guess you gotta you gotta include Pinhead. But yeah, Terrifier, Ghostface, Chucky, Pinhead, Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers, Leatherface. I think that's almost all of them. What time is it? I was late. So Norman Bates was one of the first slasher guys. Um, I would say it's a slasher film, but does he qualify as one of the slasher characters? I don't think he does because, all right, well, refresh me. Didn't he didn't come back for the sequel, right? Like, I think part of the slasher film trope is that they have to come back in returning sequels to do mayhem. Yeah, Candyman counts. Jigsaw counts. Yeah, yep. You're right. Absolutely, Jigsaw is definitely within the slasher. Candyman. Uh because I'm trying to remember, because I did watch Candyman 2, I think once. Does that count though? Because the girl took over for him at the end of the first Candyman. Didn't she come back in the second movie? That's what, like I said, to be like a proper slasher um, villain, it has to be someone who returns in the subsequent sequels. Moon says Arlie Ermy was amazing in that movie. I don't know who that is. In most movies, at Rest in Paradise. I love that film at the time. Don't watch the sequel. The original film was good for horror. You naming good ones. Yeah, so like I said, the thing of the slasher movie franchise is that the villain has to return in the subsequent sequels. I don't remember if Candyman returned for the subsequent sequels, or was it people kept taking on the curse after him. Now, you could kind of say the same thing for Ghostface and Scream, except that at least if it wasn't the same person, they were embodying the same outfit. So that's how I guess Ghostface loosely counts as the returning slasher, because even though it's a different person, they're wearing the same outfit and unaliving people in the same manner with that outfit on. So Ghostface becomes sort of a slasher. He's sort of like a slasher in a meta sense, since Scream was supposed to be like a meta commentary on horror films. The problem was Scream was good at that, But then you had a whole franchise of horror movies that were trying to be like Scream, where they were trying to be like a meta commentary on horrors. But it's like, whereas Scream was genuinely doing that, the other ones were just mirroring Scream. The only other one that did it well outside of Scream was I Know What You Did Last Summer. But then, like I said, it was a whole genre of meta horrors that came out in the early 2000s. And then you had the remakes of the classic slasher films that came out in the 2000s. So it wasn't a lot of it. It wasn't really a lot of good, genuine horror films in the early 2000s, except for the stuff that came out of Japan at the time. Like Japan was at the time making good horror films because they had that whole genre of demon child horror films like Ringu and all of those. But kind of bring us back full circle to like sci-fi and fantasy. Um, my point was that the what made the scene, what made that whole episode compelling in Andor, showing the Gorman massacre, wasn't it wasn't it wasn't the gore of it, because like I said, it wasn't gory since it's a Star Wars show. What, like I said, what made it emotionally compelling was showing the sheer brutality of the Empire against the citizens within the Galactic Republic. Well, now the Galactic Empire, just showing what they would, the, the means they would do to fulfill the Emperor's wishes. Like it takes you out of it, like it takes you out of fantasy into something that could really happen, because it was modeled on something that loosely actually happened in real life, which was the massacre of the people during the French Resistance movement in the 18th century. So, like I said, that's what makes it so compelling. That's why I would say if you do like Star Wars, it's worth a watch. And even if you don't like Star Wars, but you like you like a good spy thriller, or and you like science fiction, then it might be still worth a look. But you would probably be lost if you didn't watch Star Wars Rogue One, because it's a prequel to what happens in Rogue One. So, this is the sheriff in Texas chainsaw the sergeant in Full Metal Jacket. Wait, that's the same guy? The guy in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's the drill instructor from Full Metal Jacket. Anyway, so that's my recommendation. Like I said, if people like Star Wars, they should probably check out Andor. It's something that's surprisingly good to be a Disney made film. I mean, Disney made TV series, because Disney has been absolute trash in how they handle everything George Lucas has created. But I guess for some reason, Tony Gilroy was allowed to make a masculine Star Wars show. It is not feminine at all. There's no girl there's no girl boss stuff going on in Andor. Okay. And you got guys being guys, like even putting hands on women. So you wouldn't see that in most Disneyfied Star Wars, as opposed to George Lucas Star Wars. Like, there's no girl bossings. There's not going to be some Ray that rises to the occasion out of nowhere. It No. Um, Andor doesn't have a female sidekick that outshines him. There's none of this stuff is going on, and there's no clear, and with the rebellion versus the Empire, there's there's no like good guy. Like there's no one who doesn't have dirt on their hands. Put it that way. Like I won't say that Andor is a bad guy or he's a. I would say he's an anti-hero. Like and the people who assist him are complicated people. Like there's no one who doesn't have dirt on their hands in the rebellion in their fight against the Empire. Akon says, "Here's a classic line from Star Wars. Hey, oh Ray, yeah, they ruined my boy. Like if Star Wars, the sequel trilogy could have been better in a couple of ways. One is that you they should have just let Ray fall to the dark side because she kept going so quickly to the dark side anyway because that's where her power set came from because her grandfather was the clone of Darth Palpatine. He wasn't even Palpatine himself. He was her grandfather was a clone of Darth Palpatine. I think some people miss that her grandfather was a Sith clone of Darth Palpatine. He wasn't Darth Palpatine himself, who obviously was destroyed when he was thrown down the the shaft in the Death Star. Like his body was obliterated, and then through Sith cloning technology, he was brought back to life because he projected his essence using Sith magic into a new body, which he already had being made for him. So she's like I said, she's not even the granddaughter of Sith of I mean of Palpatine. She's I mean of Darth Sidious. She's the granddaughter of his Sith clone. Just whack. So yeah, she it would have been more realistic if she fell to the dark side in the second movie, and then Luke finds out that no, he actually needs to be training Finn because it's obviously it seems like it was obviously set up in the original movie, The Force Awakens, that he was force sensitive. He was wielding a lightsaber without hurting himself. Um, he was able to break his stormtrooper brainwashing because that obviously it was meant to show that that wasn't something that happened too often. That's why it was everyone's looking at him like you were a stormtrooper because they often did not break their brainwashing. They were brainwashed at birth to become stormtroopers. As the Empire, you know, no longer wanted clone troopers. They wanted regular people whom they could just train from birth to be to be mindless soldiers. But it was cheaper to just find people and then to clone them using cloning technology. And then the clones also, I think a lot of people didn't realize the clones age rapidly too. So it was just more, just you know, just on the economic level, it was just more cost effective to just get regular people and make them stormtroopers than to clone them. So, Emily says, yeah, but in any case, yeah, I mean, if you're a Star Wars nerd, Andor is worth a gander. I still got two more episodes to go, just because, like I said, I didn't want to try to binge it all in one night. Because once you do, you start missing details because you're just trying to. Once you start binging it, it's like you're more trying to just get through it than enjoy it. So I rather space it out so I can enjoy it as opposed to like just try to get through it. Which is why I watched the second. I mean, this is why I watched the eighth episode twice. I watched it today and then I watched it 2 days ago because it's like I said because it is the it is the emotional crescendo of the of this season. But yeah, I'll probably watch the rest later uh, today or tomorrow. Today because it's past midnight. Um, but on that note, I need to go get some sleep. and some water so I can fix my voice. Stay hydrated, guys. And I want to say something about staying hydrated really quick. It's becoming a little bit of a pseudoscience that people just keep saying drink water, drink water, drink water. Like that's yes, you should drink water, but if you're not thirsty, you don't need to drink water. Like drink water because you're thirsty, or you've been in a lot of heat, physical heat, not psychological heat. Obviously, if you've been exposed to a lot of ongoing heat, or you're just thirsty, then drink water. But I think it's become sort of a mantra teetering on pseudoscience where people just keep saying stay hydrated like it's some magical elixir. No, you still need to exercise. You still need to eat well. You still um, you still need to avoid certain toxins and substances. So yeah. Anywho, Andor is good. I was completely wrong about it and dogging it out earlier this year. So I can admit my mistakes. And also, I may do a live where I take everything out of my toy storage because someone asked me about it. But I would do that as a separate live so that I can give it its due. It's due. Its due respect because it would be a lot of stuff to pull out of that storage, which I have a bunch of stuff on top of it, so I would have to move everything off top of that storage, my toy cabinet, my little toy storage box to pull all those things out to show people, and then I have to take them out of the contain the cases in which I have them, um, and then probably to show the other stuff around my bedroom, and that would be most almost all of my current collection aside from the stuff that I still have overseas. And this all this stuff will be taken overseas too. I'm just debating whether I will bring it, try to bring as much as it with me when I fly over, or will I just have it shipped there through international packers, which is probably what I'm going to have to do. But that's going to be so expensive. But which is another reason why I'm slowing down my collection because the more I collect here, the more I'll have to ship overseas. And being that a lot of the stuff is vintage, is more likely to break in transit to the Philippines. But yeah, I've just gotten some new stuff today. Like I bought the vintage Happy Meal changeable, which was like the McDonald's version of Transformers. It was so good they released it 3 times, but I got the original one. I got the chicken McNugget one because that was like the first one they ever released. And then I ordered on eBay, and the seller actually gave me a free Happy Meal toy on top of that from the Jungle Book release. So when they re-released the Jungle Book in 1990, they released the Happy Meal toys with it, and so I got Louis um, free with the changeable. So that was cool. And like I said, I mentioned that I just went to McDonald's last week and got the new Happy Meal with the mashup of Ninja Turtles and Hello Kitty, and I got the Raphael version. So that's all packed away now, along with my mini McBoo bucket, which is like the size of it's about the the width and circumference of a quarter, and but in the size of a the, like the length and height of like a thumbnail. No, well, not thumbnail. What do you call those little pin? Those I forgot what you call those things. But it's kind of tiny, but it has all the exact detail of an actual McBoo bucket. And that will be my next and probably last Happy Meal that I buy for a while. Is going to be the next McBoo bucket that um, it drops in late September, early October. Then who's to say what comes out in December or 2026 that I might buy. But that'll be my next foreseeable Happy Meal stuff. And like I have some other vintage Happy Meal stuff. I got the Super Mario 3 um, thing. I got the real Ghostbusters cartoon um, pencil sharpener thing. I got the old Muppet Babies, not the from the first one, but from the second one when Kermit was on a tricycle. The first one he was on a skateboard, so I got all that stuff. I have any Star, and then I have a bunch of Lego Batman stuff and other DC comics related stuff that they released back like 10, 12 years ago. But the vintage stuff's like from the 80s and 1990. Then there's some stuff from Hardee's. I plan on getting to some vintage Hardy stuff. The original Pound Puppy they released through through the Hardee's meal, and the Ghostbusters 2 toy with the little sound thingy. Oh, and I might get the Burger King Alf puppet as well. That's on my wish list. Garland says, "Yeah, I remember those Jungle Book Happy Meals. I need that Godzilla Taco Bell cup from the '90s." Oh, you can probably find that on eBay. Just make sure you you compare prices so you don't get gouged for it. But yeah, most of the stuff I find on eBay, so I'm sure you can find it on eBay. But yeah, I would need those two Hardee's um, children meals, like the Pound Puppy and the Ghostbusters siren thing, and that'll make up all my little vintage children's meal toys. And then I want to get a new, like I said, I'm gonna get the new McBoo bucket that comes out this October. I got the one from last year because McDonald's started in 2022, started releasing McBoo buckets every Halloween. But I didn't know about it until 2024 last year, and that's when I got it. Um, because I was going to buy one of the vintage ones. I was like, no, let me just buy one of the new ones. And I got the white one, but I want the orange one this year. Anywho, I'm out, guys. Have a good night or a good day for Moonlit and others overseas. For folks watching this on replay, if you want to support the channel, you can do so by either dropping me a super thanks or you can sign up for one of the memberships. It costs less than a Happy Meal. um, and you can drop something in the Cash App as well. Still taking donations from my friend Micah, but I did already pay her. Still trying to get her back on the show just so she can thank everyone. Um, but until then, guys, take it easy. I'm out.